"I haven't done this before," the virgin giant mail order bride told the lonely cowboy. That night, she learned what pleasure meant. "I haven't done this before," the giant mail order bride confessed, her trembling fingers clutching the lonely cowboy's vest as golden lamplight painted shadows across the rough-hewn walls of his Wyoming ranch house. And in that moment, everything about their careful, respectful 3-month arrangement shattered like glass. Prudence Holloway stood nearly eye to eye with Silas Blackwood, her virgin body rigid with fear and longing, her substantial frame that had been mocked and rejected back east, now pressed close to this bearded rancher who looked at her like she was something precious instead of something wrong. He sat before her, his calloused hands steady on her waist, despite the hunger burning in his storm-grey eyes, his cowboy hat still on his head, as if he'd been caught mid-thought between restraint and surrender. The bed loomed behind them. That forbidden territory they'd both avoided for months, sleeping in separate rooms like strangers instead of husband and wife. But tonight, the storm raging outside had forced them together, had stripped away their defenses, had made this giant bride admit the truth she'd been hiding. She wanted him. But to understand how they got here, you have to go back 3 months. Back to the day Prudence stepped off that dusty stagecoach in Redemption, Wyoming, and unfolded her 6'2" frame from the cramped interior like she was apologizing for existing. The driver had whistled low and said something about Silas not mentioning she was substantial, and Prudence had felt that old familiar shame wrap around her throat like a noose. 24 years of being too tall, too big, too much. 24 years of men looking past her or through her or anywhere but at her. Her father had died and left her penniless, and no man in Philadelphia would have her, so she'd answered an advertisement from a Wyoming rancher who needed a wife who could read and write and keep accounts and endure isolation. The letter never mentioned love. It never mentioned touching. It was a business transaction, and Prudence had been grateful for that, because at least it was honest. Then she saw Silas Blackwood standing outside the mercantile, and something in her chest cracked open. He was tall enough that she could almost meet his eyes. Not quite, but almost. His face looked carved from stone, all hard angles and weathered lines, with silver threading through his dark hair. He was older than she expected, maybe 38, maybe 40, and when their eyes met, she saw something. In those storm-grey depths that matched the loneliness living inside her own bones. He looked at her height, and his expression didn't change. No mockery, no pity, just a slow nod like he was confirming something he already knew. "Miss Holloway," he said, his voice rough as creek gravel, "welcome to Redemption." And when he took her trunk without flinching at the weight, without making a joke about how a woman her size probably packed half of Philadelphia, Prudence felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. The ranch was 15 miles north, tucked into a valley where the mountains rose up like cathedral walls, and the sky stretched so wide it made her dizzy. The house was bigger than she expected. Solid log construction with glass windows and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Silas showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, and then he said the words that should have relieved her but somehow felt like rejection. "You'll have your own room, lock on the inside. I won't force myself on you. This is a partnership, not—" He'd cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes. "Not that." Prudence had nodded, professional and grateful, while something inside her whispered that she didn't want professional. But she pushed that voice down deep, because wanting things had never gotten her anything but disappointment. Those first weeks passed in careful politeness. Silas woke before dawn to work cattle with his 3 ranch hands. Prudence kept the house, learned to cook on the wood stove that seemed designed to burn everything she touched, and started organizing his accounts. The ledgers were a disaster. 10 years of scrawled numbers and coffee stains, but she had her father's gift for mathematics, and within a month she'd transformed chaos into order. One evening, Silas looked at her work, and something shifted in his face. "You've got a real talent for this," he said, and the approval in his voice made her feel 10 feet tall instead of awkwardly oversized. They started talking more, taking meals together instead of in separate silences. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the brutal winters and the cattle drives and the constant fight against nature. She told him about teaching school in Philadelphia, about her father's gambling debts, about the relief of finally being somewhere she didn't have to shrink herself to fit through doorways. And one night, when the conversation had gone deeper than usual, she asked him why he'd really sent for a mail-order bride. Silas had been quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I had a wife, Margaret. She died bringing our son into the world 5 years back. He died too, 3 days later." His voice was flat, carefully empty. I can't go through that again, caring that much, losing that much. But a ranch needs family, and I'm tired of being alone. So I thought if I found someone who wanted partnership instead of romance, someone practical who wouldn't expect—" He'd stopped, jaw tight. "Wouldn't expect you to love her." Prudence finished softly. Yeah, she should have felt insulted. Instead, she understood. "I know what it's like to protect yourself," she said. "To build walls so high nobody can hurt you. I've been doing it my whole life." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment the walls between them thinned to paper. But they stayed in separate rooms, kept their careful distance, until tonight, when the April storm rolled in with hail and wind that sent the horses screaming, and Prudence ran to help Silas secure the barn instead of hiding safe in the house like he'd ordered. A shutter tore loose and caught his hand, ripping flesh and blood welled bright red. She'd grabbed his arm without thinking, her heart pounding with fear that felt too big, too revealing. They stumbled back to the house through the storm, and, in the lamplight, dripping and breathless, she cleaned his wound while he watched her with an intensity that made her hands shake. "You should have gone to the house when I told you," Silas said, his voice rough, "and let you face that alone. I'm your wife, Silas. In name only." "Is it?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Because it doesn't feel like just a name anymore. Not to me." Silas had gone very still. "Prudence, why did you really send for me?" She threaded the needle to stitch his deepest cut, needing something to do with her hands. The truth this time. He'd stared at her, jaw working, and then he'd said, "Because I read your letter and I saw someone like me, someone who'd been hurt. Someone who wanted something real without all the mess of feelings. I thought we could build something good without risking." He stopped, looked away. "But it didn't work. Because I wake up thinking about you. I see you working in the kitchen, and I want to touch you. You ride out to check the fence line, and I'm proud. You laugh at something Billy says, and I want to hear that sound every day for the rest of my life." He'd met her eyes then, and the hunger in them stole her breath. "I tried not to care, Prudence. God knows I tried, but I failed." She'd set down the needle with shaking hands. "Silas, and you're so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you." Prudence had actually laughed, a broken sound. "I'm a giant. You're perfect." He stood, still holding her hand, and now they were face to face. "Every inch of you. The way your dresses never fit right. The way you look at the mountains like they finally make sense. The way you're not afraid of me or hard work or storms. I want you, Prudence. I want you in ways that have nothing to do with contracts or partnership, and I've been going slowly mad trying to be respectful." She'd kissed him, just pressed her lips to his, because if she didn't, she'd combust, and Silas had frozen for one heartbeat, then kissed her back like a man starving, one hand cradling her jaw, the other wrapping around her waist. His mouth tasted like coffee, and something uniquely him, and when his tongue traced her lips, Prudence had made a sound she didn't recognize as her own. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she'd whispered the truth. "I haven't done this before, any of this. I don't know. We'll figure it out together." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "If you want to." "I want to." She said it firmly. "I want you." And that's how they ended up here in his bedroom, with the storm raging and 3 months of careful distance finally breaking apart. Silas took her hand and led her upstairs, and every step felt like crossing into foreign territory where the old rules no longer applied. His bedroom was simpler than Prudence expected. Just a large bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser, a window overlooking the dark mountains. No photographs on the walls. No mementos, like he'd stripped away everything that might remind him of who he'd lost. He lit the lamp on the bedside table, and in that golden light, they stood facing each other while the storm hammered the roof, and Prudence's heart hammered her ribs. "We can stop any time," Silas said, his voice rough. "Just say the word." But Prudence's hands were already reaching for the buttons of her shirtwaist, trembling so badly she could barely work them free. 24 years of being told her body was wrong, too much, not feminine enough, and now this man was looking at her like she was something he'd been waiting his whole life to find. Silas covered her hands with his, stilling them. "Let me," he said softly. "Let me take care of you." He undid her buttons slowly, peeling away each layer of fabric with a reverence that made her want to cry. When he eased the shirtwaist off her shoulders, Prudence fought every instinct to cover herself, to hide, to apologize for taking up so much space. But Silas was looking at her like she was a miracle, and something in his expression made her stand straighter instead of curling inward. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm nervous." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "And cold. We'll fix both." He shed his own shirt, revealing a chest marked with old scars and hard muscle, then drew her against him, skin to skin. The heat of him made her gasp, made her understand for the first time why people wrote poetry about touch. His hands were rough and gentle at the same time, sliding up her back, learning the landscape of her body like he was memorizing something precious. They undressed each other piece by piece, and Prudence wanted to hide from the lamplight that showed every inch of her too tall, too angular frame. But Silas kept whispering beautiful like a prayer, kept touching her like she was delicate instead of oversized. And gradually the shame began to loosen its grip. When they were finally bare, he laid her on the bed, the quilt soft beneath her back and stretched out beside her. "We'll go slow," he promised, his storm-grey eyes locked on hers. "You tell me if anything hurts or feels wrong." Then he started kissing her. Not just her mouth, but her throat, her collarbone, the swell of her breasts. Every place his lips touched came alive with sensation, like her body had been sleeping her whole life and was just now waking up. When his mouth closed over her nipple, Prudence cried out, her back arching off the bed. Silas lifted his head immediately. "Too much." "No." She was breathing hard, her hands fisting in the quilt. "Not enough." "Please." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something younger, lighter. "There's my bold girl." His hand slid down her stomach between her thighs, and Prudence gasped as he touched her in places she'd been taught never to acknowledge, never to explore. He was patient, circling and stroking with a focused attention that made her feel like the center of the universe. The pleasure built slowly, tension coiling tighter and tighter in her belly, and she heard herself making sounds she didn't recognize, desperate, needy sounds that should have embarrassed her but didn't because Silas was murmuring encouragement against her skin. "That's it," he said, his voice gone rough. "Let go, Prudence. I've got you. I won't let you fall." And she believed him. For the first time in her life, she trusted someone enough to let go of control, to surrender to sensation, to stop protecting herself. The tension inside her wound tighter, unbearable, and then it shattered. Pleasure crashed through her in waves that made her whole body convulse, made her cry out his name, made her understand why people risked everything for this feeling. She came back to herself slowly, Silas holding her, pressing kisses to her forehead while she trembled in his arms. That was... She couldn't find words. Her education had never covered this. I didn't know it could feel like that. That was just the beginning. He shifted, settling between her thighs, and she felt him then, hard and hot, pressing against her entrance. The reality of what was about to happen hit her, and fear spiked through the lingering pleasure. This might hurt at first, Silas warned, his jaw tight with restraint. If it's too much, you tell me and I stop. You understand? Prudence nodded, her throat too tight for words. She trusted him. That was the terrifying, exhilarating truth. She trusted this lonely cowboy who'd promised her nothing but partnership, who'd kept his distance for 3 months, who was now looking at her like she hung the moon. He pushed inside slowly, so slowly, and there was pressure, burning, a sharp pain that made her tense and gasp. Silas stopped immediately. Breathe, he said, his voice strained. God, Prudence, you feel... He groaned, a sound of pleasure and restraint mixed together. Breathe with me, she did, forcing air into her lungs, and gradually her body adjusted to the intrusion. The pain eased into a deep, overwhelming fullness. He was inside her, part of her, and despite the discomfort it felt profoundly right. Like 2 puzzle pieces that had been searching for each other finally clicking into place. Can I move? Silas asked through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of holding still. Yes. Prudence wrapped her arms around his shoulders, anchoring herself. Please. He withdrew slightly, then thrust back in, and the friction sent sparks along her nerve endings. The pleasure from before started building again, different now, deeper. Silas set a steady rhythm, his body covering hers, his breath hot against her neck. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could hear the low sounds he made that told her he was losing control. Touch yourself, he said roughly, the words barely coherent. Like I showed you. Make yourself feel good while I... Prudence reached between their bodies, finding that sensitive place, and the combination of his thrusts and her own touch was devastating. The pleasure built faster this time, sharper, and when it broke over her, she clenched around him, crying out his name. Silas followed her over the edge with a guttural sound, spilling inside her, his whole body shuddering. He collapsed beside her, gathering her against his chest, and they lay tangled together while their breathing slowed and the storm outside finally quieted. Prudence felt different. Not just in her body, which ached in new places, but in some fundamental way, like she'd been living her whole life as a rough draft, and tonight had finally become the finished version of herself. Are you all right? Silas asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. Did I hurt you? A little at first. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, sweat and soap and something earthy. But then it was... She felt herself blushing even in the darkness. It was like coming home. Like I'd been looking for something my whole life and finally found it. Silas's arms tightened around her. Stay with me tonight. Don't go back to your room. They'll stay. She traced the scars on his chest, old wounds from a hard life. I'll stay as long as you want me. Forever then. He said it simply, like stating a fact instead of making a promise. I know we said this was just partnership. I know I promised not to ask for more than you could give. But Prudence, he tilted her face up so she had to meet his eyes. I'm asking now, not just for tonight, for every night, for whatever this is between us. Her heart stuttered. What is it between us? I don't know what to call it yet. His thumb brushed her cheek. But it's real. And I think, he swallowed hard, I think it might be the thing I've been running from for 5 years. Love. He meant love. The word hung between them, unspoken but present, and Prudence felt tears sting her eyes. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. He kissed her forehead. But I'm more scared of losing this, of losing you. So I'm asking, will you stay? Not just in this house, but with me. Really with me. Prudence thought about Philadelphia, about being too tall and too much, and never quite fitting. She thought about the careful distance she'd maintained these past 3 months, protecting herself from wanting something she was sure she couldn't have. And she thought about tonight, about learning what pleasure meant, about discovering that her body wasn't wrong at all. It was just waiting for the right person to see it clearly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." Silas kissed her then, slow and deep, and Prudence understood that this was a different kind of first time. The first time someone had chosen her. The first time she'd felt beautiful. The first time she'd believed that maybe, just maybe, she deserved good things. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in 5 years, Silas Blackwood didn't dream about the graves on the hill. He dreamed about the future, and for the first time in 24 years, Prudence Holloway didn't dream about shrinking herself small enough to fit. She dreamed about taking up all the space she needed, because she'd finally found someone who had room enough for all of her. Prudence woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and the weight of Silas's arm draped over her waist, his body warm against her back. For one perfect moment, she lay still, savoring the reality of it. The solid presence of him, the way her body ached in new places, the proof that last night hadn't been a dream. Then panic crept in like cold water. What now? Did everything change? Would he regret it in the harsh light of morning? Would he look at her differently? See her clearly now, without the softness of lamplight and storm, and realize he'd made a mistake? "I can hear you thinking," Silas murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. "Stop it." She turned in his arms to face him. His hair was mussed, silver and dark mixed together, and his eyes were soft in ways she'd never seen. The hardness he carried through the day was gone, replaced by something tender and unguarded. "I don't know what happens now," she admitted. "Now we get up, have breakfast, do our chores." He traced her jaw with calloused fingers. "Same as always, except now I can kiss you whenever I want. And tonight, if you're willing, we do this again. And keep doing it until we're too old to manage." His mouth quirked. "Which might be sooner for me than you, considering I've got 14 years on you." Relief flooded through her. "Just like that? Nothing changes? Everything changes?" He kissed her slow and thorough, but not in ways that matter. "You're still you, I'm still me. We've just stopped pretending we don't want each other." He pressed her hand over his heart, and she could feel it beating steady and strong. "What I feel for you, I'm not good with words, Prudence. Never have been, but it's real. This is real, I know," and she did. She'd spent 3 months learning to read this man's silences, his small gestures, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, even when he was trying to maintain distance. What she saw in his face now wasn't obligation or morning after regret. It was something warmer, deeper, something that might become love, if they were brave enough to let it. They rose, dressed, went downstairs together. Prudence's body protested with every step, a tender ache between her thighs, muscles she didn't know she had complaining about the night's activities. But it was a good ache, a reminder that she was alive, that she'd finally stopped just existing and started living. In the kitchen, they moved around each other with new ease. Silas starting the coffee while Prudence mixed biscuit dough, their hands brushing as they passed. Small touches that felt monumental. The ranch hands arrived for breakfast, Ezra with his weathered face and knowing eyes, Dutch who was built like a bear and talked half as much, and young Billy who couldn't be more than 19. If they noticed something different between Silas and Prudence, they were smart enough not to comment. But Ezra caught her eye and smiled. Just a small quirk of his mouth that said he knew, and he approved. After breakfast, Silas headed out to check the storm damage. Prudence had her own work. Bread to bake, accounts to update, a tear in Silas's good shirt that needed mending. But throughout the morning, she'd catch herself smiling for no reason, touching her lips where he'd kissed her, remembering the way he'd looked at her like she was beautiful, the way he'd said her name when he came undone inside her. She felt transformed, like she'd been living in black and white her whole life, and someone had just introduced her to color. She was in the kitchen that afternoon, elbow deep in bread dough, when Billy burst through the door looking panicked. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Blackwood, but we got trouble. Bull got out during the storm, tore through the north fence. Boss is up there now with one of the steers that got cut bad. He wants to know if you can ride out with the medical kit. Prudence didn't hesitate. She wiped her hands, grabbed the kit she kept stocked with supplies, and followed Billy to the barn. As she saddled Clementine, her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Another thing she'd learned these past months, how to be useful in ways that mattered out here. The ride to the north pasture took 20 minutes, and with every step, Prudence felt more settled in her own skin. This was her ranch now, her home, her life, and she wasn't just Silas's wife on paper anymore. She was his partner in every way that counted. When they reached the damaged fence, Silas was there with Ezra and Dutch, wrestling a panicked steer to the ground. The animal had a nasty gash along its flank, blood matting the fur, and it was fighting them with desperate strength. Silas looked up when Prudence arrived, and something shifted in his expression. Pride, she realized. He was proud she'd come, proud she could handle this. Proud she wasn't the kind of woman who fainted at blood or hard work. "Easy now," Silas murmured to the steer. His voice calm despite the animal's thrashing. "Prudence, when I give the word, you move fast. Understand?" She nodded, kit in hand, already assessing the wound. Deep but not fatal if they got it cleaned and stitched quickly. Silas and Dutch got the steer pinned, and Prudence moved in without hesitation. She'd done this before on smaller animals, on Billy when he'd caught his hand in a fence, on Silas himself just last night. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound, steady as she threaded the needle, steady as she began stitching with quick, efficient movements. "You got a rare one there, boss," Ezra said, watching Prudence work. "Pretty as a picture, practical as they come. And she doesn't faint at the sight of blood. That's what I call winning the lottery." Silas's eyes never left Prudence. "I know." When she finished, she stood brushing dirt off her skirts, and Silas crossed to her in 3 long strides. He took the medical kit, set it down, and then, right there in front of all the hands, he cupped her face and kissed her. Not long enough to be scandalous, but unmistakable. Acclaiming, a declaration. "Thank you," he said against her lips. Prudence felt herself blushing to her roots while the hands whistled and whooped. Even Silas looked embarrassed, a flush creeping up his neck, but he didn't apologize or step back. He just took her hand and held it, right there where everyone could see. As they rode back to the ranch together, horses walking side by side, Silas reached over and laced his fingers through hers. "That was quite a declaration," Prudence said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "Figured it was time everyone knew you're mine." He glanced at her. "If that's all right with you." "More than all right." She squeezed his hand. "Though I should mention our contract specified 6 months for consummation, or the marriage could be annulled. We've still got 2 months left before that deadline." Silas grinned, and it transformed him completely. The hard-weathered cowboy disappeared, replaced by someone younger, lighter, almost mischievous. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood, I reckon we'd better make absolutely certain we fulfill that contract, thoroughly. Wouldn't want any legal complications." "Very thorough," Prudence agreed, heat rising in her cheeks. "For legal purposes, of course." Of course. That night they fulfilled the contract again. And the next night, and the night after that. The separate bedrooms became a fiction they maintained only for appearances. Prudence's room stayed neat and unused, while she spent every night in Silas's bed, learning his body, teaching him hers, discovering that pleasure came in infinite variations. Sometimes it was slow and tender, Silas taking his time to worship every inch of her. Sometimes it was urgent and desperate, both of them too hungry to wait. And sometimes, in the quiet after, they'd just talk about dreams and fears and the future they were building together. The ranch hands stopped pretending not to notice. The careful distance Silas and Prudence had maintained for 3 months was gone, replaced by casual touches, stolen kisses, the easy intimacy of 2 people who'd stopped fighting what they felt. Ezra told Prudence she'd done something he thought impossible. She'd made Silas Blackwood smile again. Dutch mentioned that the boss seemed lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight for 5 years and finally set it down. And young Billy, blushing furiously, said he hoped to find a woman like her someday, someone who was strong and smart and didn't mind getting her hands dirty. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when Prudence would catch Silas staring at nothing, his expression distant and haunted, and she knew he was thinking about Margaret and the son they'd named Thomas. There were moments when she'd see other women in town, petite, delicate women who fit the mold of what a wife should be, and the old insecurities would whisper that she was still too much, still wrong, still fooling herself. And there were moments when both of them would pull back slightly, remembering they'd promised each other this wouldn't get messy. This wouldn't involve feelings they couldn't control. One evening, about a month after that storm-changed everything night, Prudence was working on the accounts when Silas came in from the barn. He stood in the doorway watching her, and when she looked up, something in his expression made her set down her pen. "What is it?" she asked. He crossed to her, pulled her up from the chair, and wrapped his arms around her. Just held her, his face buried in her hair, his breathing unsteady. "I'm scared," he said finally, the words muffled against her neck. "Of what?" "Of how much I need you. Of what it would do to me if I lost you." He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were raw. "Margaret died because I got her pregnant. My son died because I wanted a family. And now you're here, and I want God, Prudence, I want everything with you. But what if wanting it means losing it? What if I'm cursed?" "What if?" She kissed him quiet. "You're not cursed. You're just human. Bad things happen, Silas, but that doesn't mean they'll happen again." She took his face in her hands. "Sindeu, and I'm not Margaret. I'm tall and strong and stubborn, and I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I'm not leaving you. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay." She pressed her forehead to his. "And I can promise that loving you, because that's what this is, Silas, we can stop pretending otherwise. Loving you is worth the risk. For both of us. Loving me," he repeated, like testing the words. "Yes, I love you." She said it clearly, firmly, because it was true, and he needed to hear it. "I love you, and I'm not afraid of it anymore." Silas's eyes closed, and when he opened them again, they were wet. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking. "God help me. I love you so damn much it terrifies me." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Prudence understood that this was another kind of first time. The first time either of them had been brave enough to name what they felt. The first time they'd admitted that the walls they'd built for protection had become prisons. The first time they'd chosen love despite the risk, despite the fear, despite everything that told them to play it safe. That night, when they made love, it felt different, sacred somehow, like they were making vows that went deeper than the ones they'd spoken in front of the preacher 3 months ago. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Prudence whispered into the darkness, "No matter what happens, Silas, I'm glad I found you. Even if—" "Don't," he said fiercely. "Don't talk about endings. We're just beginning." And Prudence let herself believe him. Spring came to Wyoming with a fury of wildflowers and new calves, and Prudence Blackwood stood on the porch of her ranch house, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, watching her husband ride in from the north pasture. 8 months had passed since that storm-changed everything night, and now she was 6 months pregnant, her body finally, gloriously too much in ways that made Silas's eyes go soft every time he looked at her. He dismounted and came straight to her, pressing both hands over hers on her stomach. "How's our daughter today? Or son?" "And very active," she smiled. "I think he or she is going to be tall. Good, takes after their mother." Silas knelt, pressing his ear to her belly, and Prudence ran her fingers through his hair, now more silver than dark. When he looked up at her, she saw everything in his face, love and fear and hope all tangled together. They'd both been terrified when they realized she was pregnant, remembering Margaret, remembering loss. But Dr. Patterson in town had examined Prudence and declared her strong as an ox, built for bearing children, nothing to worry about. "I'm scared," Silas admitted, like he did every day. "I know." "Me too." She pulled him up, kissed him. "But we're going to be fine. All 3 of us." That night, wrapped in their bed with his hand protective over her stomach, Silas whispered, "I never thought I'd get this. A second chance. A family, you. Well, you've got me," Prudence said, "forever." Every stubborn, oversized, inconvenient inch of me. Perfect, Silas corrected, kissing her until she believed him. Every perfect inch. And for the first time in both their lives, they stopped being afraid of happiness and just let themselves have it.